Welcome back to the show, Conspiracy Realist. Our classic this week is for our friends down south, way down south, not quite Antarctica, a little bit further north, Australia.
Oh, this is Pine Gap. Guys, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was turned into an entire spy series on television called Pine Gap. I think it was made into a TV show after we covered it, but it's such a secretive thing. What does it remind you of? Is there an American equivalent?
HARP, Area 51, it's like in that sort of echelon of conspiratorial locations, but Pine Gap is unique. And Pine Gap at the time in 2018, it employed over 800 different people, and officially no one knew what it did.
All right, well, let's infiltrate the gap.
From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We are joined with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this stuff they don't want you to know. This episode in particular has been a long time in coming because, as you might already know, we spend a lot of time on this show researching military bases or mysterious compounds across the planet. And while we often travel outside of the bounds of these United States, we tend to focus most often on facilities here because, hey, it's our home turf, and honestly, that means that we're going to hear about places in the U.S. or associated with the U.S. way more often than, say, a secret base in Pakistan.
Yeah, and public documents that we get access to generally are about stuff that happens on our turf.
We need way more foreign intelligence agency connections. So on the off chance that you're listening and you feel like you catch a wild hair, please go ahead, email us.
Hook us up. Give us those military connections.
Yes, like some of our fellow listeners did after we did an episode on Australia recently, and someone wrote to us about this very topic.
And then someone else sent us a koala bear.
Yeah.
No, we should only say koala.
I'm joking. I'm trolling. I did it on purpose. Like they got mad because we called them koala
Did
bears.
we explain that on air?
I don't think we did.
Okay, so everyone in the U.S. is very much aware that koala are marsupials. The most common marsupials for us here in the States are possums, and for the record, I feel that our country got very much shortchanged.
Yeah,
in that regard.
Those nasty-tailed things.
Here's the thing, too, on that one. I think I was the most egregious offender of having the bear suffix on that, and that's just a thing I do. Sometimes I call Matt Matty Bear. Yeah. Sometimes I call Ben Benny Bear, and I call my kid her name Bear. So it's just a thing I do. It's a sign of affection and that I think something is cute.
Beautiful.
What's true is that koala bear is just the term that people in the U.S. use. It's clearly not accurate, but we do want to set the record straight. We're surprisingly up to date on what is and is not a marsupial. And have been for years now. Speaking of for years now, your fellow listeners have been asking us to dig into a strange story of another compound on the other side of the world, a secretive, access-restricted facility called by some, and mainly by critics, the most important U.S. intelligence operation on foreign soil. Welcome, friends and neighbors, to Pine Gap.
Oh, yes, and our story begins in this small little town called Alice Springs, which only has about 24,000 people, but it's the second largest population in Australia's Northern Territory, where, obviously, by those numbers, there aren't many people.
Yes, Sydney, this is not. Alice Springs is located in something called the Red Centre. It's pretty far inland. It's surrounded by different deserts, scrubby grasslands, and nowadays its major official industry is tourism.
Woo.
Like any town, Alice Springs is not perfect. It has a pretty significant itinerant population, and there's a lot of racial tension, but it soldiers on nonetheless. our story kicks into high gear if you travel about 10-15 minutes south of Alice Springs. You will see some signs saying no more photographs, turn around immediately, restricted area. And if you ignore those and somehow get past the security, you'll find a compound codenamed, all capital letters, Rainfall.
I have heard also that you will be promptly arrested and fined about $3,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it's true.
For your trouble.
It's like the same thing that happens if you try and get into Area 51.
Yeah, the Groom Lake area. It's interesting. One of my friends who works at our local watering hole was out exploring this area, and he and his ridiculous brother had the amazing idea of trying to drive as close as they could. Did you hear this story off air? Did I tell you? He got to he got close enough to see some signs, and then in the distance on an abutting cliff, he saw the glint of a sniper rifle, and then two trucks came out and started chasing them down and almost ran them off the road just as an intimidation tactic.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
And it worked. He's probably not going to go back. Now, this place, codenamed Rainfall, is remote. It's in the heart of the outback. It's surrounded on all sides by barren land and a cartoonishly high amount of surveillance. As you said, Noel, this is a place where you will be aggressively
deterred.
Perfect word.
And monitored, which is appropriate and will come into play. I also just want to point out early on, this is also probably one of the most cliche Australian features that you'll ever hear anybody talk about is kangaroos. And apparently this particular location is just lousy with them. But most other more, urban parts of Australia, you're not just going to see kangaroos hopping out of the woodwork. But here you are very likely to, because of the climate and the desert and the wide open spaces and all that. And I just want to give a shout out to this podcast that I learned a lot from called Weird Crap in Australia from the Modern Meltdown Network. So shout out to those guys because they did a good job talking about this episode and have with kind of like a insider's perspective, which will also come into play later.
Weird crap in Australia.
You did good, Ben.
Thanks.
And check out their Patreon because I think they want some money to buy some mics. And nice mics are important.
There you go.
So back to Rainfall. This base is reached by traveling down a dead-end road marked with, as we said earlier, signs warning away visitors. Without security clearance, the only way to really see this compound is by air or by climbing the nearby ridges of the MacDonnell Ranges that surround the site. What do you see when you happen to fly over this thing and peek out the window at just the right time?
There are these big white domes that you've seen before, probably, at least in pictures or in spy movies. They're called geodesic domes, and they just look almost like a golf ball, a really big golf ball.
Like Epcot.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. Ooh, like Epcot.
Like Epcot with a less detailed texture.
Yeah, definitely. But you'll see those. That's the biggest thing you're going to notice.
Mm-hmm. And those golf balls, we'll get into this a bit later. They are covers for radar dishes, which is a little bit anticlimactic. Because there's so many fun things that could be in a giant golf ball.
That's what they say is in there.
That's what
I would
they
have
say.
thought lots of smaller golf balls.
Mm-hmm. Officially, this site is known by the tremendously sexy name, the Joint Defense Facility Pine Gap. As of now, it employs well over 800 Australian and American employees. They used to be primarily American back in the day, but there was a little bit of a hubbub about that. According to leaked U.S. intelligence documents, when asked what happens at the site, people should say its purpose is to, quote,
support national security of both the U.S. and Australia. The facility contributes to verifying arms control and disarmament agreements and monitoring military developments.
Yeah, okay. As you can imagine, folks, the sheer size of this enterprise makes it a crucial part of the local economy. But it brings us to a bigger question. How did this thing get here? The story starts on or around December 9th, 1966. Well, it started before then, obviously, but on December 9th of that year, Australia and Uncle Sam signed a treaty agreeing to establish a, quote, joint defense space research facility.
Oh, it sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty vague term, but on the offset, it does sound neat, right? I mean, who's against space research? I think we can all agree we need to learn more about space. The facility started off with 2 antennae, so it looked to be a pretty small operation, and the remote nature of this site, while it makes it very inconvenient to travel to, it didn't strike anyone as particularly strange because it's pretty common to build space research facilities off the beaten path. You know, if you have a observatory, you want to avoid light pollution. If you have a radio telescope, you can sometimes legally shut down all radio sources.
If you're in West Virginia.
Right, for thousands of miles. So, of course, you don't want this thing to be in downtown Sydney or Melbourne or something, which is how you pronounce it. But by 1970, over 400 American families had moved to the area, and operations, whatever they were at the time, space research, I guess, began.
Space military research.
Space Force.
We call it space search for short, right?
Yeah, space search.
And this base is pretty quiet, at least in the international sphere and the public eye. It doesn't get a ton of scrutiny. It grows in size and scope quietly, staying, pun intended, generally under the radar until 1999. What happened in 1999?
Well, there was this thing called the Aussie Senate Committee on Treaties, and there were some gentlemen who were asked about, what is this facility? What does it do? Those gentlemen were part of the Australian government. They said no when asked to give details on, whatever this treaty was for whatever it is that they're doing. There was an Aussie Senate Committee on Treaties, and the government said no, basically. We will not tell you.
Right, which happens sometimes with our Senate and their committees when they ask questions about intelligence agencies.
We can have a closed session, maybe, and we can discuss with one person or another. But
right, we can pre-approve the questions.
Yes.
Right. So the committee calls on a very interesting character in this story, a professor named Des Ball, which I think is a great name.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's probably the best name we're going to run into in this show.
He sounds like a real ladies' man.
So Des Ball, Dr. Des Ball, or Professor Des Ball, is an intelligence expert who's had a real wrinkle in his undies about Pine Gap for years and years and years. He's been a huge opponent of it. They called on him to explain exactly what Pine Gap did. According to Professor Ball, the compound had, by this point, 1999, expanded. And now it housed about 18 different antennae instead of 2, and the staff had increased from 400 in the early 60s to 600 in the 90s. And furthermore, he says to these folks, what's eventually going to happen if no one stops this? It's going to employ over 1,000 people. And I hate to clue you in, Senate committee, but space research does not even begin to cover what these people actually do at Pine Gap.
And we're going to jump into that right after a word from our sponsor,
Space Force.
Here's where it gets crazy.
So according to Des Ball, Dr. Des Ball, ladies' man, Pine Gap was monitoring things in space more than space itself. So maybe like other satellites? Yes, in fact, exactly that. Other satellites monitoring spy satellites.
Oh,
yeah. And he outlined 4 potential categories of types of signals that were to be collected at Pine Gap. And these are quite broad.
Yeah. Telemetry from advanced weapons development. We're talking ballistic missiles. We're talking all kinds of other things used for arms control verification, which is kind of a thing that we've kind of know that's what they're doing. That's what they say in the mission statement up above. They're looking at signals from anti-missile, anti-aircraft radars, transmissions intended for other communication satellites, which could be a whole host of things nowadays. even in those days. And Ball also described the operational area as containing 3 different sections.
Oh, he also mentioned microwave emissions.
Oh, yeah, microwave emissions. Forgot about those. Long-distance telephone calls? Are you making some of those? Well, Pine Gap's probably listening.
Well, here's the thing, too. We always talk about the lag with like technology that the military is aware of versus like when it kind of trickles into the public sphere or whatever.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder if like they were laying the groundwork for monitoring technology that wasn't even in use yet by consumers.
All forms of technology in perpetuity.
Perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you say, Matt, satellite station keeping section, that was one of the operational areas, signals processing station, and the signals analysis section. None of the Australians who worked there could visit that entire area until 1980. These satellites are key because together with the NSA's Menwith Hill base in England, Pine Gap has become a command post for 2 missions that were not officially in the cards at all. 2 missions that the Australian citizenry was never allowed to vote on, nor really allowed to know about for a long time. The first was one named M7600. It involved at least 2 spy satellites, and in a secret 2005 document that leaked, they were meant to provide, quote, continuous coverage of the majority of the Eurasian landmass and Africa. So that's Asia, Europe, all the stands, Russia, and then the African continent. This initiative was later upgraded as part of a second mission named M8300, which had a 4-satellite constellation and then covered all the hits: Soviet Union, China, South Asia, East Asia, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and territories in the Atlantic Ocean. But what exactly are these things doing? They're a little bit too high for a lot of people to see them, unless you know exactly where you're supposed to be looking and you've got a telescope and stuff. But we had said in previous episodes, the real devil in the details for anybody who wants a secret spy satellite is that there's not a way to disguise it. That's how people found, what were they? The CIA, was it the Key satellite program?
I can't remember, but yes.
Corona.
Corona. That was it.
So they're more than, as we said, 20,000 miles above the Earth's surface. But what are they doing? They are equipped with these huge suites of surveillance technology that may, to your point, Noel, have almost certainly was outpacing whatever was available commercially or known publicly at the time. And they are meant to monitor wireless communications on the ground, such as the things sent and received by radios, satellite uplinks, and cell phones, possibly just like the cell phone that you are using to listen to this podcast right now.
But thankfully, you're not streaming this, right? You're just listening to us download on your phone. They don't hear anything. It's fine.
Well, it depends. If they consider it a strategic and tactical military, scientific, political, and economic communication signal, they are definitely going to gather it. They're also not going to tell you. It's meant to keep tabs on missiles or weapons tests in targeted countries, but also, like a vacuum cleaner approach, to sweep up intelligence from any foreign data system they can find, emphasis on military systems, and provide that surveillance to support U.S. forces. Which brings us to their secret rooms.
I knew there was going to be a secret room. There's always a secret room.
There really is. There is, in fact, a secret room in Pine Gap that no Australian employees can enter.
Wait, what?
No Australian employees can enter. And it is specifically made for the United States military. It's the U.S. cryptographic room.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, according to this story, there's a secret room that the U.S. allegedly can't enter, which is the Australian cryptographic room.
See? Got to be fair.
That does seem fair, but to what end? Why I don't even know. We'll get there, I'm sure.
You can never be too sure when you're dealing with spycraft like this.
One Australian did make it in. Just one guy made it in once. So according to Professor Des Ball, there were at least 2 areas of the facility back in the day where Australian nationals were not permitted entry. One was the U.S. National Communications and Cipher Room, and I guess that would be the cryptographic room that you mentioned, Matt. And the other is the, quote, key room where they do the final analysis of all incoming intelligence.
As we mentioned before, it's the analysis sector.
Right, exactly. So there was when he gave this testimony, it's interesting because there was a handwritten addendum that was sort of a response to it. And with that mention of the first room, the communication and cipher room, somebody wrote, correct, but Bill Hayden, when he was the shadow PM, did enter once. We should pause for a second for our U.S. listeners and walk through what a shadow PM is. It's not as cool as it sounds.
Yeah, it's just shadow night. Really, it's when the moon casts shadows. That's what it's all about.
It was originally Shadow BM, but they changed it.
Is it Prime Minister?
It is. So opposition parties in this kind of governmental structure create create positions that mirror what the dominant party is doing. So if there's a PM for dominant party, then the opposition party has their own PM called the shadow PM, and their job is to react to different policy and legislation, usually diss it and say, well, here's what I would have done, and that's why you should elect us.
I'm going to make a rare sports analogy.
Go for
sort
it.
of like guarding someone in basketball.
That's a very good sports analogy, yeah.
They're mirroring. I like it.
Yeah, you got to bob when they bob and weave when they weave, and hopefully it'll balance out, and you're sort of basically playing defense, right? I don't know.
And that makes me think, it'd be interesting to extend that analogy a bit. I wonder if people would watch it in a sports game if after the game, like the shadow goalie or something said, this is what I would have done. I don't know. I guess that's what sports pundits already do, right? Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time saying, well, the one team got more points and our strategy next time will be to get more points. And everyone's like, oh.
Okay.
What an epiphany.
I get it.
I personally love it when football commentators just keep referring to running the football. They just say, they're doing such a good job of running with the football. And it's just such a basic description of a thing. It's like,
well, it's there are two parts of the game here, boys. You got to run with a football, you got to throw the football. Sometimes you got to kick the football, but mostly it's running with a football.
These guys seem to think people are doing a good job of running.
Hey, doing a great job running a football.
Hey, thanks, Matty.
So what's strange is, all right, so Bill Hayden, Shadow PM, we know what that is now. He did enter the area once officially, that first room. So one Australian has been in there that we know of. But here's the thing. Next to the description of the second room, there's handwriting that says, all caps, no such area.
And that was the final analysis room, the key room.
So what's the truth? For now, it's a mystery, but we do know what goes on internally in Pine Gap, thanks to a guy who's pretty much a recurring guest on our show now, or at least a recurring contributor, Edward Snowden.
Oh, yes, the American intelligence contractor who turned whistleblower several years ago. It's crazy how long it's been since Edward Snowden came out as a whistleblower. But he's saying that Pine Gap is described as playing a significant role in supporting both intelligence activities and military operations.
But, why wouldn't they be? I mean, given the size of the installation and the technology that they have, if they're doing that, and we know they're doing that, surely this is part of it, right?
Well, I guess what he's saying is, in addition to monitoring the satellites and looking at some of those communications, this facility is actually making real-time contributions to places where battles are being fought.
Oh, like the drone programs.
And other stuff.
Yeah, so to crystallize that, the primary point the Snowden revelations are making is that while this was advertised as something to help monitor global peace through verifying arms control, did these countries really destroy these missiles? Are they really going to deploy a nuke? It turned out that they were going full Snoopy.
And here's where you should bomb.
Mm-hmm. Right. So according to another guy, Professor Richard Tanter, who is a senior research associate at the Nautilus Institute, an honorary Melbourne University professor, Pine Gap also contributes data for CIA drone operations in countries in which the U.S. is not at war. So Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, and so forth. It's also critically important in, and I love the way he said this, quote, whatever the United States is going to do on the Korean Peninsula.
Oh.
It sounds like he doesn't know, we don't know, no one really knows.
Whatever ends up happening.
We should also point out that Professor Tanter himself is pretty biased against the base. He's president of the Australian Board of International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and he wants the Aussie government to make a very clear-headed assessment of whether it is in Australia's best interest to contribute data for drone assassinations and the targeting of nuclear weapons. And here's why this drone assassination targeting of nuclear weapon stuff is important. First, to backtrack a little, it's clear that Pine Gap is part of Five Eyes and Project Echelon. We have a previous episode on that. The important TLDR, or I guess TLDL for this purpose of this medium, is that the important part here is that countries may have laws that do not allow them to invade your privacy if you are a citizen of that country, but they can make bilateral and multilateral agreements such that, let's say the U.S. or the NSA cannot legally monitor your text messages or figure out what kind of weird erotic fanfic you're into, but the United Kingdom can. And then they can share it with the U.S. So the U.S. is getting the same stuff. There's just a little bit of legal shucking and jiving there. That's the problem critics have with this place. The problem that Dr. Tanter has with the leaked documents that were obtained by an outfit like The Intercept is that there's not only a huge transformation in Pine Gap's function in recent history, but these documents, this paperwork he got, provide authoritative confirmation that Pine Gap is involved in the geolocation of cell phones used by people from the Pacific to the edge of Africa. And this shows us that Pine Gap knows the geolocations. That means it derives the phone numbers, and it often derives the content of any communications, providing the ability for the American military to identify and place in real time the location of targets of interest. So let's say somebody for some reason wants to send a drone out to assassinate
me.
Sure, out to assassinate Matt.
My phone's right here.
And his phone's right there. This means that they can find not you in particular, Matt, but they can find your phone. And that makes coordinating drones a controversial topic because they're pulling stuff from a SIM card, right? And maybe just for the purposes of targeting, they're not pulling the content of the conversation, text, calls, cute emoji that you send to and from that device. According to one drone operator, we're not going after people, we're going after the phones. And we're hoping that the person on the other end of that missile is the actual bad guy. So if you are in a war-torn area, be careful what phones you pick up.
Yeah, just don't. I mean? Just don't.
And that's how non-combatants and innocent civilians have been murdered.
Well, and also those drones, they're kind of blunt instruments. We don't really think we think of them, I think, falsely as being some sort of like targeted super assassination machine, but it's like a radius, right? Isn't it?
It's a Hellfire missile or other classes of missiles that explode with a radius. Yes.
Yeah. They're called tactical, but probably the best way to say it is comparatively tactical.
There you go.
Right?
As opposed to like wiping out an entire city.
Right.
Maybe just wipe out a city block.
Right. Or a wedding.
Yeah.
Instead of a building, an entire skyscraper.
Yeah, if you look at some of the stuff on LiveLeak that you can find with the targeted strikes with drones, I mean, it just depends on the munitions, but one missile wouldn't take out a block at all. It would take out a room for sure, or like part of a building, part of a building.
Yeah, but that's the thing that becomes so divisive so quickly. So supporters of extrajudicial killings involving UAVs will say that it is really the best, most safe way to preserve the lives of military members and to minimize the possibility of civilian casualties. Opponents will say, no, because it's like the old autonomous vehicle argument. We're still screwing up.
Yeah.
And I don't know, doesn't it have this devil's advocate, doesn't have the potential to make you more trigger happy if there's no human cost on our end? It makes you maybe more likely to roll the dice and just give it a go. You're not having to send out your best men and women for the job.
That's a good argument as well, because one of the balances for Western societies that you often hear touted is that the public is supposed to be able to react to this. It's often said that wars are more politically expensive for representative democracies and straight democracies because the people have a voice in government. In this situation, unfortunately, Australians largely do not, because this may be now a joint United States and Australian base, but a lot of the drone work is coming from the U.S. side. And we should establish, highlight, underline, italicize, bold the following. This issue with drone targeting and widespread vacuum cleaner approach surveillance, these are the criticisms of Pine Gap that you will hear most often in legitimate journalism, right? These are the ones you will hear about in security journals, in viable publications and stuff.
And there's good reason.
Yeah, because it's real. And after we take a quick break, we'll examine some of the stranger stories about Pine Gap. Okay, so for some reason, here in our notes, we have this section titled "The Crazies Come Out to Play."
Yes.
I don't mean to be in any way denigrating with that. It's just these are some pretty insane things.
They're outlandish claims.
They're outlandish claims. They're so far outlandish that they're literally extraterrestrial.
Oh.
Because out of lands. Oh, my God. But it's no surprise that Pine Gap has become the subject of numerous conspiracy theories and increasingly, I like the word you use, Matt, outlandish claims. We've got a few of the really out there ones. I don't know. Where do you guys want to go first? Do you want to do the UFO stuff first?
No. I know where we want to start. You know where we want to start.
Boy, do I ever. It's the secret portal.
Yes.
Yeah,
I want to talk about portals. Have you guys ever seen a portal? That's a Donnie Darko reference, apparently.
Maybe this is one of the strangest conspiratorial claims about Pine Gap. And the argument is that the CIA has been conducting time travel experiments and super soldier programs in Pine Gap, sort of, because they're using portals to send people to Mars.
Yeah.
Wherein a lot of these things are conducted. And we have to...
Boy, howdy.
Yeah, we have to treat this with a wheelbarrow of salt. There's a French researcher named Richard Sauder who claimed to have spoken with a whistleblower named Rich Hansen. And according to Sauder, Hansen is not only a part, or was not only once a part of these ultra-secret programs, but he left for Mars military service from a time portal in Australia.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So this is interesting because it is true that various people who did work at Pine Gap at one point or another did say that the bosses were CIA. So we know that part is true.
Yeah. Portals, time portals.
It reminds me of the plot of the movie Time Cop, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Except this time on Mars.
And this time, it's personal on Mars.
But I mean, okay, I don't want to poke fun at it too much. What if Rich Hansen is a real person and Sauder was also genuine when he was telling the story? I mean, there is an alternate universe where this occurs, so some other dimension.
Mm-hmm. If you believe in the multidimensional stuff. And thank you for the setup, Matt, because it is true that Sauder, by the way, also claims in his book, Underground Bases and Tunnels, that the base, Pine Gap, or Rainfall, operates in alternate dimensions, so exists on multiple planes of reality at once.
But see, if multiverse theories are correct, then isn't everything existing in multiplicity at all times?
Isn't that the whole point? No, I think what he means there is that it operates on multiple planes.
There's
so that means
section?
you can reach through and you can, pick up your screwdriver from this other dimension, bring it back over to this dimension, or step through. But to what end, I guess? Are you affecting the timeline in ways that militaristically tactical ways?
Well, good question, Matt. I think you're going even larger. You're going to the meta level, which is that if universes are infinite and all possible things exist in some sort of reality, timeline, branch, sphere, what have you, then there would be one or many where this thing is actually true, and we just happen to be living in one where that's not the case.
Oh, did I say we're living in one where it's not the case?
In your mouth at that last part. Well, here's the problem with that, which is a very familiar problem to anybody who reads about this sort of stuff. If it is an ultra secret program, and we live in a reality where a very public Washington Post journalist just very publicly got dismembered for not even saying horrible things about the Saudi crown prince and the U.S. government, then how are these people still alive?
Yeah.
How in the holy kangaroo are these people still alive, blowing up the truth, exposing the hidden secrets of reality tripping, time traveling, CIA financed Nietzsche Ubermensch out on Mars?
So
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So again, that's Underground Bases and Tunnels, a book that you can find somewhere at some time in some dimension.
In this dimension?
Maybe.
All right.
Act now before the Mandela effect kicks in, right? So we got through that. That's probably one of the strangest and craziest, but one that has, I think, many more people taking it seriously is the association of Pine Gap with the activity of unidentified flying objects. And it dates way back to just a few years after things really got rolling there in 1970.
This is true. In 1973, there was a cartographer who reported seeing a vertical shaft of blue light, very, very blindingly bright vertical shaft of blue light in front of him just after the stroke of midnight. And it was clearly the source of this was the base. So he decided to take a closer look, and he moved his vehicle to the base a little bit closer, and he saw a large gleaming disc hovering about 1,000 feet from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he kept watching it. I guess security must have been less tight at that time.
Yeah.
Because he's there for a while. He watches it for about half an hour, and during this time he sees another beam of blue light emanating from the UFO toward the ground, where it's hitting several of those radomes, those golf ball things, right? And it's hitting, the light is hitting those directly, and then the lights cease, and another light beam appears, and this time from the radomes to the craft, and this goes back and forth, this exchange of light, bright burst. Again, for about half an hour, and then the disc begins to spin more and more quickly. Flash, boom, it shoots into the sky and disappears.
Whoa. Now, I have a couple of questions about that one that we cannot answer right now.
Okay.
Because I imagine it being more of a laser beam of light. If there's some kind of, I'm just imagining that it's completely true, there's some form of energy or communications transfer occurring in some way. That's why you would have a beam of light from one of those things. That's the only thing I can imagine. Because if not,
is it refueling? Does it run on light?
Well, yeah, but here's the whole thing. Like, okay, how could you discern that the light was coming from the ground up to the craft? Right? It would be if it's just a splash of light, essentially, like a spotlight or something. You would be able to tell, oh, it's more centered on the ground, and then it's a little wider up top near wherever the craft is, 1,000 feet up. It would occur. That kind of light shaping would occur if it was just a light. If it was a laser beam, how could you tell which way it was traveling? Because it's instant. It travels at the speed of light.
That's right.
So
Very good question.
that kind of thing just makes me go, okay, maybe weather balloon.
Right. Maybe it was something that he saw that he just didn't understand. Quite possibly. Well, in 1975, then, let's look at this one. There was a pilot and several passengers on a private plane near Pine Gap's airspace, which is obviously restricted airspace.
Mm-hmm.
And they all said, hey, here's a cool idea. Let's try to sneak a peek at all the weird stuff they have to be doing down there at Pine Gap.
All right, mate, let's do it.
Mm-hmm. And so out of nowhere, this big white object appears to take off from the base below them at a breakneck speed. And as soon as the witnesses were able to focus on this thing that was taking off, it had vanished into the sky. The pilot made a report of this sighting as soon as they landed, and the plane was fine, obviously, thankfully. Both the pilot and all of the passengers were asked to wait for investigators who were going to come and get some more details from them. But when the investigators show up, again, according to the story, they told the witnesses that they men in blacked them. They said, forget everything you've seen about this. Don't talk about anything. You saw nothing.
Do you think they flashed them?
That would be cool. That would be cool, but then how would this story have gotten out?
Oh, you're right. One person wasn't looking directly.
One person
at the
blinked
thing.
really quickly.
Yeah.
I always wondered if that would work in Men in Black. But then we have more reports of UFOs in Pine Gap.
Oh, yeah. In 1984, there were 5 anonymous witnesses who said they saw something else. It was another sighting there at Pine Gap. They wanted to be anonymous due to their apparent positions within the Australian government. You know, it's one of those things, those situations where you can't prove that these people are part of the Australian government,
right?
But they said they were, and that's why they want to be anonymous. So there's, let's say the leader of this group had been receiving all kinds of reports about UFO sightings just above Pine Gap or near Pine Gap in the weeks leading up to this thing that would become their encounter, this night, this moment. One message that was received by this leader of the group was a little more mysterious than the rest, and it advised that something big was going to happen at Pine Gap in the upcoming days. So, guess what they did? There's 5 of them, and they split themselves into 2 groups using 2 different vehicles, and they approached the base from 2 different positions.
That seems smart.
That's very smart. Good idea. All right, now let's keep going down there. Once they get there, they essentially start staking out the grounds, which is, again, we're talking about a massive campus, or I don't know if campus is the right word for it, massive compound, and that's only 5 people to cover that with only 2 vehicles. But anyway, they're just going to check it out for as long as they can. They stay there for days. The first 3 days, there's absolutely no activity that they notice, at least anything of note. But on the 4th night, everything changed when several large military vehicles started ferrying all these large groups of workers in coveralls to the large radomes, the big golf ball looking things. So they're like, I wonder what those guys are doing. And then things changed.
Yeah, as this was all taking place, as this brouhaha, I imagine, a pillar of light shot upward from the ground to the sky. They don't specify whether it shot out from one of these radomes or dishes. A strange cloud was forming high above the base around this pillar of light, and when it vanished, they saw 5 strange craft making their way to the base. According to the report, 4 diamond-shaped UFOs and 1 of a, quote, cigar shape, which the people at MUFON, when we visited MUFON a while back, talked about. It seems to be a relatively common shape, at least in their experience. Once these craft were over the base, the pillar of light appeared again, this time from the craft above to the grounds below. So we see that repeat, right?
Almost like communication.
And this went on for several minutes. Yeah, it seems like the visual analog of a dial-up modem sound. Do you guys remember that? Paul, can we get a sound cue of a dial-up modem, please? Yeah, like that, but with lights.
It's like an electronic dolphin.
And this exchange went on for a while, and the strange cloud was still coalescing, and then like that, they vanished. And these are just a few of the UFO reports originating in Pine Gap. They're not even the most famous. Several of the most well-known reports include reliable witnesses like police officers, multiple groups of people from differing vantage points seeing the same thing, and then this consistent report of hidden doors. Did you guys see anything about this?
Yeah, again, these secret areas become a very common thing when you're talking about Pine Gap. These secret doors become a real thing. It's a very common occurrence when people are talking about seeing things at Pine Gap. Either doors to secret places or, like you're saying, secret doors that just exist within a wall somewhere or within part of a base that you would never imagine that there's a door there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we know, I mean, it makes sense to have those sorts of entrances and exits built into secret places, right?
Especially when there's a large underground area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look no further than NORAD or that hotel that turned out to secretly be a bunker for senators here in the States, which everyone thought we were crazy when we mentioned it at first. I'm just saying. But there's a counterpoint to these UFO reports, and it's the one. Okay, so one of the big theories about unidentified flying objects, which, of course, as we said before, not necessarily extraterrestrial. One of the big arguments is that these things are man-made technology or human-made technology that the public just doesn't know about yet, and that these things are a tremendous tactical advantage to whichever country possesses them or whichever private company, multinational, possesses them. That leads us to ask, well, how close are the U.S. and Australia really?
That's been my question from the start. I mean, it sure feels like they're giving up a whole lot of their own sovereignty, to have this facility that largely benefits us.
Right.
And not them. And if anything, puts their country in the line of fire, potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. If there really is, and to go back to this question, if there really is some sort of top secret, mind-blowing flight or anti-gravity technology, something that would change the world were it to ever come out, why would the U.S. place it in a foreign country, regardless of how friendly their relations may be at some given time?
What if the Australian government were the ones who were first contacted, and the United States placed the facility there and began, hey, we've got the biggest military, we're the ones who need to be handling this kind of thing. And then it became a joint operation. But the Australians were always the first.
I like that. That has like a ring of patriotism too for Australians there. But this is, okay, if we're speculating, this is something that gets me really quickly into the realm of science fiction. If we wanted to go profoundly deep into the rabbit hole, we could speculate that maybe there was some sort of geographical constraint that meant the base, due to its extra dimensional properties or something, had to be built in that specific spot for some specific reason. There is a portal to Mars, but it only occurs there because of some, I don't know, gobbledygook pseudoscience, electromagnetic quark superpositions.
Because of the dream time.
Because of the dream, which we originally recognized as the dream time. Oh my God, we're writing the movie now. Stargate. Aussiegate.
I'm so down. Oh, Alice Gate?
Alice Gate.
Oh, that's good. I want to go down that rabbit hole further, but I think we need to wrap this up, gentlemen.
Yeah, so let's end on the present day. As of 2017, which is the closest we could get to the present day for public reporting, Pine Gap is still expanding. It's got a total of about 38 radio dishes, many covered in those golf balls we mentioned earlier.
Those things help them
it's weatherproofing.
Work better. It's just weatherproofing.
That's
the
major
official explanation, yeah.
Interesting.
Just to keep the rust off. The North Korean situation is one of the most crucial because of the base's proximity to the Korean Peninsula and therefore the proximity of Australia. The city of Darwin in the Northern Territory is about 3,600 miles from Pyongyang and that puts it within range of an ICBM or intercontinental ballistic missile.
Ooh, which begs the question, are there ICBMs out there in Pine Gap somewhere? Are there silos?
I wonder, you think they would put all their eggs in one basket like that?
And why would you do that when you've just got super carriers and carriers everywhere that have those?
Plenty of other military bases, right?
Yeah, and subs and whatever else.
And the problem here is if we were to war game a bit, if the U.S. did become involved in a hot war with the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, then Australia would almost certainly be quickly dragged into this conflict. And despite being isolated pretty far inland, Pine Gap would be instrumental in the U.S., the informational aspects of the U.S. side of the war, but also it would have a huge target on its back because if you blow that thing up, you're poking an eye. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
That's my question. Like, how does it behoove the Australian government, who aren't even allowed into the U.S. cryptography room? You know, it seems like they're kept at arm's length about a lot of this stuff. What do we have on them, or what do they have on us? Or that's my fascination with this whole story.
What makes it symbiosis rather than parasitism?
Exactly. And I think, given what I know about our country and our tendency to maybe strong arm less powerful countries, I would tend to think it might be more the parasitic type of relationship.
Well, here's the deal. I think it would be difficult for you to name 20 places in the planet, other countries that don't have a U.S. military base in them.
Well, exactly.
Iran.
Yeah, well, I mean 20. Like, yes, we can name a few that we know for sure, but in most places there is a U.S. military presence, and it's just how it is. In this case, maybe it's even a little less intrusive because it's intelligence collection.
And it's way out of the way.
And it's also
like there's a visible, police state occupation of any kind. I mean, it's a research facility. It's essentially on paper.
And also it's not a research. It is on paper maybe, but I don't know if it can even be called that anymore because the cover story got blown out of the water so hard. I am going to take you up on that, Matt. I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back when we're back in the studio and see if I can find 20 countries that don't have U.S. bases. I don't know if I can.
I want to say there are several in Africa that don't have a military base, but they've got presence with like
outposts. Outsourced military forces, which I think we should count.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating because it's a huge question to your point, Noel. Probably one of the best arguments for it is going to be the idea of mutual security, preventing perhaps the rise of a new hegemon in the region, namely China. So maybe Australia is of the mind that we already have a good relationship with the U.S. Let's keep that going. I don't know. It goes to speculation. No, it is true that there are supporters of Pine Gap in Australia, and the primary thing they say is don't believe all the conspiratorial stuff, all the alarmist hoopla. The truth of the matter is that this is good for us, and it helps keep our country safer.
There you go.
So we do want to depict that part, just to be fair. Also, on a pop culture note, if you want to see stories that take place in Pine Gap, fictional stories, check out the new series. I think it's on Netflix. It's about Pine Gap, and it's called, as we like to say on the show, in a burst of creativity, Pine Gap.
Yes, I'm watching the trailer right now. It looks like a lot of fun.
Does it? I wonder what the tone is. Do you think it's like 24 or Quantico or something?
It feels very much like one of those police procedurals kind of thing with a little more style, maybe.
Oh, wait.
Thank God.
Ooh, it's got an American flag and an Australian flag. It says Pine Gap. It's got a whole team. I like it.
Do they look like they're legitimate intelligence workers, or do they all look like waiters from Los Angeles?
They look like waiters from Los Angeles.
Of course they're waiters from Los Angeles. That's amazing. So this is literally like a Law and Order NCIS type situation, but headquartered in Pine Gap, and it's like an adventure of the week kind of story. I don't
know.
Okay.
Is it more like X-Files? I don't know nothing about it. I just watched the trailer without sound, and it looked like that.
Well, it exists.
Can you watch the show without sound and without captions, and maybe come back and tell us what your take is?
Yes, please.
All right. So That's where we are now. These do not answer all of the questions about Pine Gap, but we do want to thank all of our listeners out in Australia, in that part of the world, who said, hey, our fellow listeners would like to hear more about this, because I don't think it gets a lot of ink here in the United States. And what better way to end the episode than leaving the last word to Professor Tanter?
It goes as follows. Quote, Pine Gap literally hardwires us into the activities of the American military. And in some cases, that means we will cop the consequences, like it or not. Pine Gap will be contributing hugely in real time to those operations, as well as in preparation for them. So whether or not the Australian government thinks that an attack on North Korea is either justified or a wise and sensible move, we will be part of that. We'll be culpable in the terms of the consequences.
Jeez.
There you have it.
There you have it.
They know the score.
Something to think on. So thank you, everyone, for giving us a listen. We would like to hear your opinion, maybe not just of Pine Gap, but your opinion of U.S. military bases on foreign soil anyway.
Like, Do you live in a different country where there's a U.S. military base? What are your experiences with that?
Mm-hmm. And is it a joint operation the way that this one is, or is it solely U.S. run? Sort of like Guantanamo. Let us know. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. On Facebook especially, we are Here's Where It Gets Crazy. That's our community page. If you haven't checked it out yet, hop on. We have some pretty good memes.
Oh, yeah. Good memes and even better people that are on there contributing all the time.
Right.
And by the way, if you've ever had any kind of unidentified flying object or submerged object or any other experience like that, please let us know. We'd love to hear your story and hopefully incorporate it into an episode at some point. So, and that's the end of this classic episode. If you have any thoughts or questions about this episode, you can get into contact with us in a number of different ways. One of the best is to give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. If you don't want to do that, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.